Cubase has got a new drum machine. On the face of it, that doesn't sound that interesting, but if you take a look in this video, you'll find that actually it's much more interesting than it seems, because there's much more to it than just kind of repackaged version of Groove Agent. So let's take a look. So here we are on Cubase, and as you'd imagine, we create this as in any other track. So we're just going to do add drum track here. You can obviously go to project, add track. And we are only going to be concentrating on the drum machine side of things for this video. For the pattern editor, that's in a separate video because there's a lot to cover, and there's plenty to cover here as well. And the pattern editor can be used independently of the drum track. So while it's defaulting to doing that, you can see we've got a pattern event. We're just going to call it drum track and then create that. That's nice. And now we can see what's going on. So if you think this is just a kind of cut down version of Groove Agent or Groove Agent SE, it's not, for reasons that will become apparent in a bit. So there's more interest here. It's not just a case of Groove Agent has been repackaged, but obviously there's some parallels. Let's load up a preset and then take a quick look. So we're just going to load up BeatStarter 01, and the usual paradigm, we've got these 16 pads here, mutes and solos, etc. We can see the name, we can see what MIDI note they respond to. You've got all these other banks of pads stretching across pretty much the whole MIDI range, but we're just going to go back to this, and if I play the pads on my keyboard, it behaves as you would expect. Kind of standard stuff. So certainly so far, pretty plain fare. We've got the ability to solo, mute, and so on. At this point, there are no mute or solo indicators and kills here. So certainly I found with some colored pads, it was a little difficult to see what was going on at one point, and it took me a while to see what was muted, particularly if you've got it going on another set of pads. But it's the audio creation side of things, which I think is interesting. So let's take a quick look at these pads. It's pretty standard fare. We get a right-click menu, which has a few useful options. I'm just going to move this up, actually, so you can get it on my screen capture area, but you can see the menu. We've got reset pad, reset all pads if you've really screwed things up, cut and copy, assign them output, which we can see elsewhere a bit later on. You can set the color. There's quite a bit of liberal use of color on here. I think that's actually quite nice. As I'm getting older, I'm getting more into coloring things in. Thought you were supposed to do that when you're a kid. Anyway, you can rename the pad, and these are probably the most useful parts of the menu. So we've got load instrument or save instrument. So this will load just for a particular pad. So if we right click this and do load instrument, here we get all of the elements. So you can see that the elements of these are all present at the moment in Media Bay. So if I wanted to load something else, so let's say I wanted Defcon's clap, I can just do this. There's a way you're going to see a bit later on how you can audition those live, etc. But if you know what you want, you can just load it up there. Save instrument. So once you've tweaked this and played around with it, as you'll see a bit later on, you can save this as an instrument. So that will mean you'll be able to just load and save pads individually. We've also got find samples and find instruments. So this really is just, it's like a shortcut to Media Bay. So you can see I've got Media Bay expanded on the right-hand side as much as it will go. And it's just looking for, in this case, chromatic percussion, etc. So this isn't doing anything as clever as I thought. It's chromatic percussion, drums and percussion, and one-shots, etc., which is, reasonably sane. It's not doing anything cleverer than that. I actually thought initially this was doing something really, really super clever, but it's the same whether you do it on this one or on this one. But it's reasonably nice if you've got all your samples present and correct in Media Bay, or even if you're just using the standard Steinberg stuff, you can see at least you get a shortcut to quite a few, in this case, samples that you can audition. Same also goes for find instruments. So that's just finding them here rather than loading the instruments. As you'll see a bit later on, I think there's a nicer way to do this, but that's pretty much it for this menu for these. Not too much to see, but the kind of standard stuff you'd expect, really. Let's look at the rest of the features. So this is in instrument mode, so we're on the instrument page, but we've also got pad effects. So this is where it becomes certainly more than Groove Agent SE. So here we are on the pad effects page, and for each pad you get a choice of 4 effects you can apply. What's highlighted here shows you the effect page, and then you can turn it on or off. So for instance, here we're on the kick. If we turn the bit crusher on, compared with it turned off, so you can hear that in action. So we've got a bit crusher. It's quite fun to play around with because we can do some interesting stuff in terms of the bit translations between each other. So it doesn't necessarily need to be the way that it was. You can get some pretty extreme effects by swapping things around. We can... So it's not just your normal bit crusher effect. It's quite nice to have all this. We've got a decimation control, which is there, your kind of sample rate control you'd expect. It's quite a nice effect overall, really. High and low pass cutoff. Output gain, I'm not going to turn that up. It's loud enough as it is. And we've even got limiter, etc. in there. So there's plenty to play around with this. And as we'll see later on, it's quite flexible. So we've also got distortion, so we can click to the distortion page. Quite nice because you've got a reasonable choice of what's going on here. Again, we haven't got time to go through all of these, but you can see there's plenty of effects to play around with. You know, there's lots of controls. You know, we can get it to go. Sounds like tragic distortion from back in the day. And the nice thing is, this is applied just per pad. So if we go to the snare is having a completely different set of controls. So if we turn the snare one on, we can see we can have different distortion on the snare than we've got on our kick drum here. Slightly annoying that it doesn't remember which page you've got open at this point. Hopefully that will be fixed soon. But you can see we can add different to the snare than we've got on the kick. The flexibility in this is quite nice. Filter. Again, we've got if you've seen any of my other videos, this is the sort of standard Steinberg filter. We've got all the options available, so you've got plenty to play around with. Obviously, most people normally start playing around with the low passes, particularly on things like kick drums. But again, nice to have that implemented because you can tune these. And if you maybe aren't getting on with the controls to do with sound generation, you can just tune things here. And obviously, if you're using a sample, that will be particularly useful. Etc. It's just static, I think, which is maybe some people won't be too happy about that, but I think overall not too bad. There are ways around that, obviously, with modulators are available now. Finally, we've got an equalizer. So again, sort of fairly standard Steinberg equalizer, but it's nice having this available here because you may not want to resort to multiple outs to do this. You might want to do it in your program, save it as a preset and be done with it rather than having to save it as a track preset with the EQs in there, etc. So the pad effects thing, I'm pretty pleased with this. I think it works rather nicely. Now, next on to the group page. So the group page, I think is slightly misleadingly named because it's sort of like the mixer, etc. Now we have got grouping, so you can have mute groups, etc. So for instance, if you've got a closed and open hi-hat, you can put them into a group. So they are mutually exclusive. So if I find these on my keyboard, so you can see that's cutting that off. If I take that out of that group and hit the open hi-hat, you can see it's ringing on. But if I put it in the same group, particularly if I put it in the right group, you can see that's cutting that off. So that behaves much more like a real drum. There's 32 groups, which should be enough, I think, for everybody, but that's quite nice. We've got level control, pan, and then an overview of delay and reverb, which we'll come to in a bit. We've got output selection, so you can have up to 32 outs on this, which again can be useful if you want to mix things separately and get access to effects you don't have, but you do have in the mixer, but you don't have within this. and then just a level meter. But you can see this gives us all the things we would expect. Again, I'd like to see some kind of mute and solo indicator and ability to clear them easily, but we haven't got everything. There we go. So that's the group page, which probably I think should be called Mixer, but there we go. Next, let's take a look at the delay. So we have a delay and reverb, which is a part of the entire program. It's shared between everything. So think of these as two send effects. So back on the group page, you could see we had a delay and reverb. These are the sends for each one. By default, they're turned down. So you might find yourself playing around with them for a bit without getting any joy out of them. So we're just going to play with the snare in this case, because I think it's probably best for delay in particular. So at the moment, because it's turned down here, you won't get any delay. So we need to turn this send up. And then now you get that. That'll be particularly joyous if you're wearing headphones with it panning side to side. We've got useful modes here. So stereo. We've got cross and ping pong. So quite interesting there. The usual stuff. We've got time delay, etc. The one thing I'm not liking at this point, I'm hoping this will be changed possibly by the time you see this, or possibly ever, is that you don't see the values until you hover over the control. Whenever I come to a page like this, particularly if I've got this much room around it, I want to know what the values are rather than having to mouse over it, etc. As ever, the usual thing, we can type values in. So if we want 50 feedback, we can get that and have that ringing on forever. We've got low and high controls. You can also send it to the reverb should you want. So we can have reverb delay if you want to do that, and a level control. It's quite nice to have that. We've got some presets potentially here. Let's see what's there. At the moment, there's nothing, but you can obviously save and load presets. If you come up with some amazing ping pong dub reggae effect that you really like, you'll be able to save it and then just recall it really easily. And we've also got a global on and off here. So that kills it for everybody. So that will kill it across all these different tracks, even if you have it turned up here with loads of different things happening. So you can just kill the whole thing. Next, let's take a look at the reverb. So the reverb is very much like the delay. We've got a send here, so I'm just going to turn this up, and then we get our reverb. It's not the most amazing reverb in the world, but it's part of a drum machine, isn't it? It's kind of, you know, it's okay. It's got a bit of capacity. We can bring it right down. And if you compare that with and without, you can hear that that's in there. We can turn on some chorusing. So you can come up with some interesting and potentially quite trashy effects in here. And again, because you've got the ability to set up the balance across the whole kit, you can get some interesting sort of overall kit balance, but maybe not apply it to everything, which again, nice and flexible. It's table stakes, but it is good to see that. So now let's take a look at the last few controls on the drum machine. So we've got MIDI reset. So if everything goes wrong and you've got a whole load of things happening, you can turn that off. Now, this is something I often have turned on is MIDI follow. So by default, the track that you've highlighted will be the one that is visible. So let's just go back to instrument because that'll make it clearer. So if we move around, you can see this area is following what I've clicked, but I can play the snare and the kick is still focused because that's what we've got there. If we turn this on, you can see it's following what I'm playing. So if you've got something frenetic happening, this may make the visuals a bit confusing because it will be all over the place doing all this kind of malarkey. If you want to edit something, you definitely turn it off, but it can be quite useful to get that, particularly if you've got a large drum kit where you're across multiple pages, because you can just play the note and you will be there ready to edit it. You can bypass all the effects. So for instance, here, if we go back to this pad, so back on pad effects, I can turn the bit crusher on, distortion, everything, it all gets bypassed. So if you're not sure if you've got a problem with an effect, etc., this is quite nice because it will turn all of these off, because doing them manually would be quite a pain. Now, probably one of the most interesting thing is the hot swap here. I really like this. This is a feature that I really wish the sampler track had from inception. It's the way a lot of useful tools work. Possibly not perfect, but it's not bad. So what this allows you to do is to hot swap and hear the effect of changing a particular sound. So if we go back to our kick here, we can see we're on this simple kick one preset. Now, if we load up the media base, I'm actually going to do this in the right zone here, and then turn on hot swap preview pad. We can change the sound of this pad and hear the effect of it straight away. So we don't need to audition it in any weird way. I'm just going to search for Beat Starter. The reason is this will make it much quicker to find. So I know that these are presets for the drum track, and I'm just going to change this for Beat Starter's 2 kick. So I've got this pad selected. I'm going to click this here, and you can see that's changed on screen. And now it's that kick instead of the one we had. Let's try Beat Starter 3 kick. So again, just click on it, and it does that. And suddenly we're into Alex Van Halen territory. Nice. We've got a real quick way of doing that. And if you're happy with that, you just click Apply Hot Swap, and now that's part of this pattern. So that's part of this preset now, and you're good to go. Really simple. I really like this. Now there is also Hot Swap Preview Layer, but this doesn't work with these kind of presets. The reason being that these are 4 layers and we need to swap a particular layer. So we haven't looked much at sound generation, but because we're looking at this now, we're just going to do it. So if we click on, let's say, layer 2 and do Hot Swap Preview Layer, and then I'm going to search for kick here and find a kick sample. Just an audio file. And then I can turn that back on and click Club Kick 1, and it swaps that in for me. So now we've got 2. You can hear both of those happening. And if I turn this off, we just get Club Kick 1. So what I can do then is apply that. So I'm just going to apply that hot swap, keep that in there. So yeah, don't forget to do that. And then let's go to layer number 3. And again, preview layer, and let's find another one. Now, obviously, they're not working super well together, but you get the idea. So it allows you to build these up really quickly rather than having to click on here and load layer or find samples, etc. This is the first time, I'll be honest, this is the first time I've used the right zone media bay, and this works quite nicely. So there you go. Every day's a school day, isn't it? So that's the most, for me, this is the nicest bit of addition here, is this hot swapping of those layers or the patterns, because it just allows you to build things up really quickly and the kind of layered sampling you're going to want to do. Now, let's look at the sound generation, because I say this is what definitely differentiates this from Groove Agent. Here we've got an empty drum machine, and we're going to look at how you can program some sounds. Now, the first thing we're going to do is actually get the Groove Agent bit out of the way, which is effectively samples. So we can add a sample layer. So we click Add Sample, and then we can add a sample to this layer. So we could drop it here. So for instance, we can do it from Media Base. Again, I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to use the Hot Swap Preview Layer because that's going to be the fastest way for me to do it. So again, I'm just going to put kick and do audio files. And then let's just pick that CR78 kit that I just saw. So there we go. That's loaded that up. So we've got all the controls you would expect with this kind of thing. So we've got a pre-filter. So you can cut your top end or bottom end off. We've got tuning over a good range, 60 semitones either way, which is pretty much, I think, as much as you'd need. And we've got an envelope here. So we've got an attack, hold, and decay envelope. You need to turn the depth up. If you don't turn the depth up, these controls do nothing. So if we put the depth about there, you can now hear the pitch changing. It's going whoop as it goes up. And obviously the amount of time you take will depend on this. So you'll need to play around with it a bit. But we've certainly got a reasonable amount of control here. If you want to reset these, you just Command or Control click them, or double click them rather, and they go back to what the defaults are. As you would expect, we've got a selection of filters. So we've got classic, again, all of the things you've seen, the Steinberg filters, etc. We've got, I think these have been, I've seen these before, you know, these are the kind of things we'd expect from Steinberg. So we've got a distortable, you know, so even if you haven't got great samples, you can get something out of them with these kind of things. And again, envelope depth, attack, hold, and decay. And then finally, amplifier with the same kind of thing. So again, not an amazing range of controls, but certainly everything you need, I think, to sculpt these sounds into something reasonable. And remember, you've got 4 separate layers. So you could load up another sample in another one, and you've got a completely different set of controls. So let's just load up something else. So CR78, and let's find that there's the accent kick, isn't there somewhere? Kick accent, there we go. So we can just hot swap that in and keep that. And again, get rid of that. And yeah, we've got completely separate controls. So you've got loads you can do here. Sample-wise, you can trim it as you'd expect. You can fade it as you would expect. So you've got these little white handles which you can grab. You'd probably be, you know, able to do them either visually or via these controls, etc. We can reverse the sample if we want to. In this case, I'm not sure I would, but although maybe I would. Maybe I quite like that. And then we've got control over the pad. So you can either have the pad being gate for on and off, or via this amplifier. So this effectively disables these parts of the amplifier. Level, pan, delay, and reverb sends, just as you would expect. But notice, again, in this case, these are shared between the entire pad, yeah? So you've got level controls for the individual here, but this is the overall thing, and it highlights the fact that this is for the pad. So you don't get individual sends there in terms of delay and reverb, but overall pretty flexible. So that's the sampling side, which is reasonable. And to be honest, if we just had that would have been okay. It would have been kind of Groove Agent SE Redux, but it would have been all right. But there's much more. So let's have a look. So here we are in the possibly much more interesting section of the drum machine, and that is that these are not samples, okay? This is all drum synthesis. So when I first saw this, I was like, oh, we've got some, you know, kind of preset sounds. That's not what's happening here. We've got individual ways of synthesizing sound. So if we go on the kicks layer or snare or whatever, we get all these different choices, and you're not just loading up a sample. So if we go for kick 1 here, we can see we've actually got something which is a drum synth. So if I play this now, we've got a click, which you can remove or put in. We've got the oscillator, which you can tune, etc. We've got a pitch control and envelope, so you can get so with just a bit of playing around with this, we can have a bit of fun. We've got an amplifier, so we've got decay here. Because again, probably the most, I wouldn't say the most useful controls, but probably the ones that you think are going to be the ones you're probably going to go for, seem to be on the top row here. We can really make this, have a bit of fun with that, etc. Distortion. You know where we're headed with that kind of thing. And then straightforward amplifier. And that is just one of these. So if we get rid of that, we can go for kick 2, and you can see the controls are different. The sound is different, the controls are different. If we go for, let's say here, we'll go for kick 3, you can see again, we've got a totally different set of controls. We've got a much more complicated noise generator. sorry, that's just that one, but you can hear that again. It's like what I thought was Alex Van Halen earlier on. Whether or not it's a great bass drum is a matter of debate. And then we've got kick 4. So you can see, again, this is working in a different way. We've got FM. It sounds like your classic FM. It's like Marble Madness is on the go. And again, with playing around with these with modulators, you can get all sorts of interesting and wacky stuff. It's the same across all of these drums. I'm not going to go through all of them because that would just be padding out this video just for the sake of it. But let's just have a quick look at the snare. You can see we've got snares and rim shots. And again, here, we're already, you know, it's reasonable. And then you can play around with and we can route these. So we've got velocity to level. So hardly at all, or you can hear that kind of thing. And as I said before, with modulators, you can do all sorts of interesting things in terms of envelope following and so on, triggering by a MIDI, just generally making this much more interesting. So there are loads of sounds to play around with in here. As you can see, we've got 6 snares, 8 hi-hats, 4 toms, 3 claps, 4 cymbals, and some percussion generators as well. And if we look at the FM one in particular, so this is the FM one. So it gives you a bit of a chance of just playing around with a bit of FM. And, you know, certainly if you're my kind of age, there was a time when a lot of computer sound cards just had FM synths. It was an OPL3, I think, FM synths on sound cards, and all the percussion was done like that. And although it was terrible, there's sometimes when you're like, I need that sound. So you can play around with, you know, and I've always felt with FM, just at the point where you think you understand it, you alter another control and then you realise you have no idea what's happening. But yeah, just have a play with it, really. I mean, there's so much. There's the original sound, and then we can add in the FM, and it can all go crazy, and it's lovely. But this is much more than I was expecting, because I thought initially when I first saw this, there weren't the presets and these weren't available. It was just a sample-based thing, and it was okay. But having these sounds, and there is a lot of playing around to be done with these, you can definitely spend a lot of time with these, changing them. Say, just going through the presets and seeing what's been done. But even if you just load them up initially, they seem to be, for once, fairly sane starting points, which is quite nice. So just this noise generator, you know, we've got a reasonable sound straight away. Whereas often I found with a lot of Steinberg products, you need to start playing around with it to get the most out of it. And definitely some of the things in things like Groove Agent are like that. This, nearly always, you're like, yeah, I could probably use that. I can tweak it and make it better. But it's definitely usable. There's a lot to like in here, as I think you probably, hopefully have seen by now. Now, we haven't looked at the pattern editor because it's in a separate video, but one of the reasons I think this finally makes sense that this is a different kind of track class rather than being just a VST instrument is that it integrates with the pattern editor. So if I make a new drum track again, and let's call it drum track 4 because I'm the most inventive person ever. If I load up a track preset, so let's load up Beat Starter, and again, working as we'd expect. But the nice thing about it is I think because of the integration between the two, when we go over to the pattern editor, all of these appear as they should do, which is really nice. Say, this is the pattern editor is covered in another video because there's so much to see in there, but the integration between the two is quite nice. So if we go back to here and change this pad, so let's just rename this pad to hello and go back to the editor. We can see it's got that. I don't know whether that's possible with VST3 instruments, but it certainly works well here. So that's the drum machine. Now, hopefully you've seen over this video that it's more than just a repackaged groove agent. It's actually a full drum synthesis engine, and it's quite interesting. It's pretty useful to have it. I think it's not perfect because there's a few things you'd like to see, velocity, mapping, etc., rather than it just being 4 layers, which you can't really do as much with. But ultimately, I think it's nice to have this integrated. I think it's a pity that it's not available on more of the versions of Cubase, but you have to differentiate between different versions. Otherwise, nobody would buy Pro, would they? But overall, I think this is pretty interesting. And with the addition of that drum synthesis engine, it's become much more usable and much more fun. If it was just samples, I'd say what would be the point, because it would just be effectively Groove Agent in the lower zone. But it's quite nice, and combining it as it does effectively by default with a pattern editor means it's pretty quick and easy to get some drums happening in a new session and get going and start doing something creative, which is always a good thing. Whether or not new sounds will be developed for it and sound libraries for it, certainly that's a possibility, but I think there's so many options for editing and making those sounds interesting. I don't know whether or not that will be necessary. They may just be effectively repackaged versions of the sounds that are in there, but it's certainly a worthwhile addition as far as I'm concerned, and something which is nice. And certainly when I first saw it, I was like, what's the point of that? Now I know. As ever, hope you found this video useful, and we'll see you again soon-ish for more Music Tech Tuition.